There is a reason that we bring Eve Harow back 3 years in a row. In February, we tend to set up the summer programs. And in February, we said, okay, you'll come, you'll talk about Iran, bring us up to date. Whoosh! So much has occurred since then, most of it not so good. And so the fact that we brought Eve back is because things are changing on the ground so rapidly. Who thought we would be talking about internal problems as opposed to worrying about Iran externally and Hezbollah and Hamas? So Eve is going to talk with us about what's going on the ground in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel. Just briefly, where are you here? Just a second. Now we're good. Eve has a master's degree in psychology from Pepperdine University. She's got a master's degree in Land of Israel Studies and Archaeology from Bar Ilan University. Eve is the special person that many organizations go to when they need information or they want to be taught or have their people, their supporters taught about what is really happening in the land of Israel. And it really is a pleasure to bring her back and have her here because we need a lot of splaining as to what is really going on the ground in the state of Israel, in the land of Israel. So please give a big round of applause to welcome Eve Harow. Eve is perfectly capable of standing up and giving a lecture for 45 to 90 minutes on her own, but somehow it seems to be a little bit easier doing an interview. And in order to adequately discuss what is going on in Israel right now, both judicial reform, both the contrast in what's going on between left and right, the contrast between Ashkenazi and Sephardi Mizrachi, what's going on there. There's so much to discuss. I think it would be first helpful if Eve would just give us a brief history of Israel, at least from 1948, not the 3,000 plus years beforehand, which a lot of people forget about, but give us a brief history because there's been a change in demographics, there's been a change in politics in Israel. And the film that we had just this past week, called Upheaval, which is this wonderful documentary on Prime Minister Menachem Begin. And the reason I bring that up, and the producer is still here, Rob Schwartz, the reason I bring this up is because part of this documentary demonstrated how much of the Israeli public reacted when Begin became prime minister. They were screaming in the streets, "This is the end of democracy." Boy, where have we heard this before? So the parallels were really remarkable, and that's why I want Eve to begin with just a brief history of what were the politics early on, how it changed, and so forth. Please.
Okay, thank you so much to Alan and to Judy for being gluttons for punishment and consistently bringing me in. Israel, it's a miracle that Israel is a democracy. To begin with, nothing to be taken for granted. The founding fathers of the state did not grow up learning about Thomas Jefferson. They grew up mainly in Russia and Poland and those countries, and there's a very socialist tilt to the country when we began. The kibbutzim, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, are really the sign of that. And the kibbutzim are extraordinarily important already before the state started. And I think all of you know that even before we officially have a state, we have a state in the making. We have health funds, and we are trying to protect ourselves. We're growing food. Hebrew University started in 1925. We're not waiting around and crying. We're really working towards something that the world, albeit reluctantly, allows us to have. But the kibbutzim now, today, just to touch on socialism, the irony is that the only kibbutzim that are still strictly kibbutzim are the rich ones, which is not exactly how the whole idea started. But they've got like a private company, let's say the ones that developed drip irrigation, they're not about to sell shares. So a lot of things have changed, and Israel's really, on an economic basis, really moved much more towards privatization. There is still way too much bureaucracy, and a lot of other things that stand in the way. But on an economic level, we're moving it more in that direction. When Israel begins in 1948, we have no friends, okay? The partition plan of 1947 votes to partition what the British had gotten after World War I. And I personally think that a lot of the tensions in the Middle East today come from World War I. If you look at the map, Sykes-Picot, and the map of how mainly Britain and France divided up the Middle East after World War I and the end of the Ottoman Empire, it's a lot of straight lines. Straight lines like you have here in the West, right? Colorado, Utah, Nevada, as opposed to Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and all the squigglies on the East, tell you that they were drawn and they were not fought over. So you look at the Middle East, they divided it up without any caring whatsoever for the tribes, the religions, any ethnic relationships that people had. And a lot of the tensions we're seeing today are because of that. So Israel is born into that kind of maelstrom. Nobody hands it to us. We're given the partition plan. The Arab world does not accept it. The war that we have in 1948 is a devastating war. We lose 1% of our population. 6 out of 600,000 Jews are killed. And in the 1950s, we have no friends at all, including and maybe especially the United States. It's not till after 1967, when we're strong and worthwhile, that the world starts to take notice of us. So the 1950s, in addition to the traumatized Jews who've been already living there, we have the remnants of the Holocaust limping in. Okay, there are 6 million potential citizens of the state who never make it because the British slammed the doors shut in 1939, exactly when we needed them open. And in addition to that, you have close to 1 million Jews who are thrown out of the Arab and African world, which is why, and I'm a tour guide, when I take people around Israel, I do a lot of politically incorrect things. But the first thing that I say to them is Israel is not a white country. Very bad. You're not supposed to do that anymore. But I say that. I say, look around. Israel's not a white country. We're actually a Middle Eastern country. Most Israelis come from the Middle East. And of course, now you have the mixed marriages. My blonde and blue-eyed daughter is married to a wonderful guy whose mother was raised in Morocco and father in Tunisia. And so you have a lot of that, and we'll talk about some of the tensions that still exist, but it's actually less in Judea and Samaria. And then on top of everything, we have another war in 56, and then comes 1967. And in May of 1967, they are digging mass graves in Israel. And Holocaust survivors are telling their children, this is here we go again. Nobody expected Israel to survive that war, let alone to triple our landmass. And so that war really took everybody by surprise. And a lot of what we're still dealing with today is maybe it happened too quickly, and Israel wasn't ready for it and wasn't prepared to know what to do with land that we had won in 6 days in June of 67, and with the people who suddenly came into our control in June of 1967. So you have the debacle of 1973, of the Yom Kippur War, which was actually a tremendous military victory, mainly by the reserves, but shouldn't have happened. It happened out of hubris, out of not understanding that what was going on in 67 was perhaps a one-off, and we shouldn't lower our guard, etc., etc., etc. And I don't just want to focus on the wars. You have in 1989 the Iron Curtain opening, at least then, we'll see if it's shutting again, and close to 1 million highly educated, but very, in the main, not Jewishly oriented former Soviet Jews who come to Israel. They pioneer really the high-tech revolution that we have in Israel is very much powered by them and the knowledge that they bring. Look at the timeline. And so they added a lot to Israeli society. Every group that has come has put their piece into Israeli society, which is a good thing, but it also creates a lot of tensions, which is really what we're seeing today. And so we come into 1993, where the Israelis are tired of fighting wars and tired of terrorism and are convinced, although I have to say that I wasn't one of the ones who were convinced, that the reason that we're hated by the people whom we now control since 1967 is because we took their land. And therefore, if we just give them land, then we'll have peace, land for peace. And we have the Oslo Accords in 1993, in which 40% of Judea and Samaria is given to the PLO and to Yasser Arafat, morphs into the Palestinian Authority. And of course, we know that we don't have peace from that because the problem isn't land. The problem is partly territorial, but a lot of it is religious. And a lot of it is something that those of us who grow up in the West, is a language that we don't understand. And I'm not talking about Hebrew or Arabic. I'm talking about the language of the Middle East. The language of the Middle East is not about guilt. It's about humiliation and honor. And those are tangible items in the Middle East. We humiliated them by winning the wars that they waged against us, none of which we were supposed to win. And by the way, the first war we lose is the last war we lose. The UN General Assembly will not have a meeting saying, oh, Israel lost this war, but let's turn it back. And let's please tell the Arabs that they should, we can't undo the Jews that they've killed, but they should, compromise. It's not gonna happen. That's not the way it works. This is a one-way deal. And so this is what happens in 1993, and those areas become bases for terror. Because what we, meaning Westerners, see as compromise and largesse and willing to meet the other in the middle in order to save lives on both sides are seen as weakness. And that is something that it took me a long time to understand, and now I understand it big time. Okay? It's not, I don't want to live on the edge of the sword. I have 7 children, 6 of whom live in Israel. I have 12 grandchildren and 2 on the way. All my skin is in this game. I'm not sitting up here for any reason other than this is how I want to protect the future. And not just my children, but in any way that I can, everybody's children, both the Jews and the Arabs. I'm tired of people dying. I really am. But if we want to really get to a peaceful solution, we have to understand what the problem is. And the problem is not constantly giving up land and giving up resources, thinking that that's going to buy the other side, because it's not. So to add to the disastrous experiment of 1993, we have in 2005 a more egregious event, which is leaving Gaza. We have close to 10,000 Jews who've lived in Gaza since after the 67 war, who have really made the sand dunes bloom. They had a tremendous market share in Europe. You didn't feel it so much here in the United States. Our major trading partner is Europe, of tomatoes and flowers and all kinds of beautiful perishable things that were growing there. We provided the Arabs there with a lot of jobs, many, many jobs. And they're the ones who really suffered when Israel in 2005 decides to destroy all the Jewish communities, take all the people out, and leave it to the Palestinian Authority. Again, under this idea that if we just leave it to them and they have their own state, they'll leave us alone. And of course, within 2 very short years, Hamas takes over from the Palestinian Authority. And when people talk about Gaza being occupied, it most certainly is. It's occupied by Hamas. It's a terror state that whenever they feel like it, shoots at close to 2 million people in Israel who have to go into bomb shelters. And cost millions and millions of dollars, and of course, lives. We have something called the Iron Dome. I'm sure you've all heard of it. It shoots their missiles out of the sky, but to some degree, it has allowed us to kick the problem down the road. Because I believe that every missile that comes out of Gaza, it should be treated as if it hit a kindergarten and killed 32 4-year-olds, because that was their intent. They are aiming for civilians. And this is the main problem that we have, is that our soldiers are used to protect all civilians, Jews and Arabs and Christians and Druze. And their children are put in, their civilian population is put in front of the terrorists. And this is a major Achilles heel that we have, is that we're trying to protect people and they're trying to use people in order to get their way. So what's happening now in 2023 is a culmination of a lot of different things. The reform is just an excuse, okay? Democracy is played out at the voting booth. And we had elections. We have elections every 6 months or so. But we had elections. We're an uber democracy. We had elections and the people clearly spoke. And I know that Alan has some quotes that he's going to read about people who are now on the anti-reform side saying themselves over the years that the Supreme Court had too much power. It's the most powerful court in the world. There are 15 people who are not elected by Israelis who can strike down Knesset laws. We don't have a constitution, we have some basic laws. And that they needed to be dialed back a bit. Not tremendously. We don't want the Knesset to also be able to strike down the Supreme Court. We want to have a balance. However, it was way too powerful on the Supreme Court. But what has happened in the intervening months has gone out of control. And as an Israeli, and I have to tell you that I'm for the reforms, but I think that everybody behaved really badly here. I think the Likud was so happy to be back in power that they tried to push through things without paying attention to the street. Read the room, always read the room. And then you also had the ultra-Orthodox who got back into the Knesset after having been out during the Bennett-Lapid government and who were asking for budgets and all the things that people do when they get back into power. And you have a fear on the side of some Israelis that they're going to lose their Israel. Now, what I'm trying to do is what I do in my marriage, by the way. It's where you are dealing with another side. You have absolutely no idea where they're coming from, but you need to understand that that's where they're coming from, okay? And to see their pain and to see where their opinion is. I do not think that Israel is going to slide into a Jewish Iran. We're not going to run. And I try and lead a traditional lifestyle. I don't want anybody telling me what to wear, what to eat, if I should get into a car on the Sabbath. I think that we have to find the middle ground where everybody can do what it is they need to do as long as it's not hurting somebody else. Okay, and that's supremely important. But there are people who really are worried about that. And I'm listening to them, and they really are worried about that because they see the power, that the ultra-Orthodox have taken. And maybe I'll stop here. I know you've got other questions, and we'll get into the other subjects from here.
Thank you. With respect to judicial reform, we had Alan Dershowitz's comments when he was here. He didn't completely agree with these reforms, but by the end of the interview, he was pretty well agreeing with what I was suggesting as part of the reforms. What the reforms have to do with is the fact that really the Israeli Supreme Court right now is the most powerful Supreme Court on planet Earth. It has the ability to strike down any law that comes out of the Knesset, but so does the Supreme Court here in the United States. A law comes out of Congress. It can be even signed by the president, but the Supreme Court would say, gee, this is not constitutional, take it back to the drawing board. So that's something that's reasonable about a Supreme Court. However, there are a couple of things that are not reasonable, and it has to do, one of them, with reasonableness. Aaron Barak was the head of the Israeli Supreme Court in the mid-90s, and he decided that the court should have a good deal more power, and he changed what went on in the court. What the changes included was, first of all, the judges on the court get to pick the new judges for the court. Now, if you're a Democrat or Republican in this country, just think if we have a conservative court that keeps choosing conservative justices, how you might feel if you don't like that. Or if we have a liberal court, as Israel's court is highly liberal, just think how you might feel as a conservative if they keep choosing liberal judges. The whole concept, I believe, certainly of a democracy and a republic, is that people come up for election every 2 years, every 4 years, and the public gets to approve them by voting for them or voting against them. In our country, in the United States, an elected president nominates a judge for the Supreme Court, and then elected senators advise and consent or reject. Everybody is elected who's making this decision. In Israel, nobody's elected who's making this decision. So that's one of the problems that the new government has. And I want to read you the words of Lapid, who was the former prime minister in the caretaking government, who years before this, he now leads the protests in the street. We're talking about 200,000, 500,000 people protesting. 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago, they had 1 million people protesting in favor of the reforms. But Lapid, who is leading this protest against it, said the following, and this was a few years before in the Kohelet Forum. He said, and I quote, "I have opposed and I still oppose judicial activism of the sort introduced by former Supreme Court President Justice Aaron Barak, which I just explained. I don't think it's right that everything is justiciable. I don't think it's right for the Supreme Court to change fundamental things in accordance with what it refers to as the judgment of the reasonable person." Okay, there may be a law against what we're looking at here on the Israeli Supreme Court, but we don't think it's really reasonable. Okay, that's a term you can't use in court. It's the law, or it's not the law, or it's how you interpret the law, or how you disinterpret the law, but not, gee, I know the law says this, but I don't think it's reasonable, therefore we're going to vote against it. So this kind of thing, number one, getting judges to appoint future judges. Number two, this concept of reasonableness are two of the strongest points that the present government is trying to change in Israel so that the Israeli Supreme Court looks more like the American Supreme Court, the Canadian Supreme Court, and Great Britain as well. That somehow is getting covered up in what the media presents. Now, you also have Boogie Ilan, who is also a leader of the anti-reform movement. And it's a speech from 2009, so it's really 14 years ago when he first came into politics. He said, unfortunately, today there are forces, call them the elites, who are influencing the discourse in Israel in a distorted way. It's manipulative, misleading to the point where we need to be very worried today. And he says he's worried about the court, he's worried about the power that the Supreme Court. The media is a force like this, the Supreme Court is a force like this. But all of a sudden, now he's leading the opposition to these changes. What we're looking at here can be a real problem, needless to say. And what has just recently happened with this reasonableness law that was passed by the Knesset saying you can't make decisions based on reasonableness, well, now the Israeli Supreme Court is going to decide whether that's reasonable or not and just cancel the law. So you're getting into a situation, which is why some people are talking about, quote, civil war, end quote. You also have a situation where not only many of the elites in Israel are speaking out against these reforms, but you have reservists saying that they're not going to serve. Could you give us what is going on inside Israel? Is that really what we're hearing, and is that really what's going on, or is it being distorted?
A lot of this has to do with the current prime minister and a tremendous hatred of him that many Israelis have. And the demonstrations in the street started off as being a protest about the reforms and quickly morphed into what we've seen before is trying to get rid of the prime minister. A few weeks ago, in a YouTube surfaced of Ehud Barak, who's another former prime minister, from 2020, discussing exactly what is happening today. The desire on his part for a coup against Bibi Netanyahu, where he himself would become prime minister. He says it flat out. I can send you the link to it. And he said, I'm not known for my overwhelming modesty, so I think that the appropriate person to take his place would be myself. Now, you cannot have a situation where you're screaming democracy, ignoring what happened at the voting booth, taking to the streets and trying to overturn the democratically elected government, all in the name of democracy. What has happened in the intervening months has actually convinced many Israelis that the issues that we have with certain people who control the country are even more serious than we thought. There's a certain glass ceiling when it comes to the army, and only certain people get promoted to be generals, etc. There are certain companies in Israel who monopolize to a great degree the market, which is why we also pay way too much for our food, and that's a different issue. My husband, who's a physician, so some of the doctors came out and said, if the reform isn't stopped, we're going on strike. And you probably didn't hear about all the doctors who signed a petition and said, are you kidding me? Like, what does politics have to do with treating our patients? And you probably haven't heard a lot of the petitions that soldiers are signing saying, I'm showing up no matter what. Here I blame a lack of leadership on virtually every single side. The generals should have stopped this immediately. They should have said to everybody, we keep the army out of politics, okay? Because what is astonishing to me is, do you not realize that Iran also reads Israeli newspapers? The Hezbollah, it marks Israeli news. And so while we're fighting inside, they're just getting ready to go. If our problem is going to Iran, we're going to need our pilots. And they're sitting there and reading that a lot of the pilots aren't going to show up. What do you think they're thinking? We're going to wait till the Israelis sort that out. Come on, this is not a game. And that's the real danger, is that people, for their own political, and I think Alan just made the point here, you have people who were either lying 15 years ago or they're lying now. But either way, they can't be trusted. Okay, years ago they said that this reform had to happen, and now they're coming out against it, and it's because they're seeing an opportunity to take down this government and put themselves back in power. Very simply, it's about that. But as a little person, I'm like, what is going on here? What happened to being a public servant? What happened to doing the will of the people? Now, in addition to that, there are a whole lot of other things happening here. One is a stress about the Jewish nature of the country. And I'm going to throw this out, and I can't give you an answer. What does it mean to have a Jewish state? Who's Jewish? Like, what is that, right? Does it mean in the public arena? Does it mean you're born to a Jewish mother? Does it mean you converted? Is it Orthodox? I happen to not be a fan, to put it mildly, of the rabbinate in Israel, and I think we need some major changes in the religious world in Israel, both in conversions and in kashrut and in a lot of things. I think where people see stress, which is also there, I see opportunity for a reinvigoration of Judaism in a national sense, something that we haven't had in a very, very, very long time. Because it's an amazing way of life. But it's not going to happen if you're coerced. It's going to happen if you understand how special it is. So, that's something that, again, is an opportunity if you had leadership who was thinking about the good of the people and not necessarily their own jobs or their own positions. You also have, to a certain degree, still some Sephardi Ashkenazi tensions here. Most of these, let's call them self-imposed liberal elites, are Ashkenazim. And
meaning from Western Europe.
Meaning, right, the white Jews, if you will, forgive a very nasty way of putting it. I can maybe do it because I myself, that's my origins, but it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. It really doesn't. So there is that element. There's that element as well. And there's, the Histadrut, the union, which for a long time controlled Israel, also saying we're going to have a strike. By what right do you tell all these people that they're going on strike? Strauss, which is one of the big companies in Israel, they pulled their advertising from Channel 14. Channel 14 is currently the only TV station we have in Israel that's giving a conservative point of view. So they want to pull their advertising from it because they want it to go down. So again, in the name of tolerance and being liberal, you're trying to shut down the voices of the people that disagree with you. This may sound familiar to some of you in the United States, right? All in the name of being open-minded. You can talk as much as you want as long as you agree with what I want you to say. Okay, you're kind of missing the point as to what that is. Now, the fact is that Israel is not a secular country. I'll give you an example from my own home. One of my sons is married to a Jewish woman. They speak Hebrew fluently. They live in Israel. Their children all go to what you would call day school and learn Bible and learn all the different studies, secular as well, science as well as everything else. Friday night is family night. They have Passover Seder, usually with me, sometimes not. They fast on Yom Kippur. They have a kosher home, but they eat out and they drive on Shabbat. Now, if I told you this in America, he's solid conservative. Solid, right? If you ask him, he'll tell you he's not religious. Because in Israel, the gold standard, if you will, of being religious is a black hat. So you have to be very, very careful when you look at the polls and the surveys about how Israelis define themselves to understand the language that we're using is not the language that you're hearing, that you're understanding. That's a very important point. Because Israel is really, I say, we're all on the spectrum, but we really are. And people are being able to play their Judaism, if you will, or live out their Judaism in ways that are not necessarily the religious ways. By defending the people, by growing food for the people, by coming out with medication that saves people. That's all incredibly important in what we do. So people should be able to choose what it is they want to do, but you have to be very, very careful when you hear, Israel's a secular state and there's a religious minority that wants to take over. Okay, there's a lot of people who integrate Jewish traditions into their life and don't think twice about it. That's just the way it is, not to mention, as I just talked about, speaking Hebrew, which is our language. Okay, it's our code, it's our language. It's the only time since the Hasmoneans, which was also Hebrew, that a language has been revived. And that in itself shows a vibrancy that you wouldn't have otherwise. So this is super, super, super complicated. I believe that everything will be okay, but I'm not sure exactly how we're going to get there. But one of the bright lights that I've seen here is that both sides chose to use the Israeli flag as their symbol during their demonstrations. And there were even a couple of stories about someone who's leaving the anti-reform demonstration and with his flag, and someone who's coming to the pro-reform demonstration says, "Can I borrow your flag? I left mine at home," and they handed it off. Okay, so I think it's important that we live in a free society and everybody is able to express themselves, but there has to be red lines. Red lines are stopping the trains. Red lines is going, and I have to say honestly, I'm not a big fan of the Prime Minister. He's done some wonderful things. I did not vote for him. And I think it's time that perhaps we let someone else come into the country. But he and his wife tried to go on vacation in the Golan Heights last week, and the hotel that they were staying at was completely surrounded by, I'm already going to call them anarchists, because this is not just a normal reform. And they went on TripAdvisor and tried to lower the rating of the hotel that Netanyahu was staying at. The hotel, thankfully, is suing them for doing that, because they weren't staying there. You're not allowed to put an opinion on TripAdvisor if you weren't actually at the hotel. Because that's already crossing all red lines. To attack members of Knesset in the airport, one of the members of the Likud was going somewhere with her 75-year-old mother, and they were accosted in the airport. That's already not normal. And that's also frightening, because that kind of violence can easily slide into more violence, right? So there has to be civil discourse. And again, it's pretty ridiculous to say that we're going to overturn the country in the name of democracy. All right, so yes, things have to be tweaked, and people do have to be more sensitive on all sides. But I live in Judea. I live in a place called Efrat, which is in Gush Etzion. It's an area that is not under Israeli law. It's the area that was liberated in 1967, that no government, left, right, or center, has had the, whatever body part you want to fill in the blank there, to deal with. So 40% was given away in 1993 to the Palestinian Authority. Well, that worked out really well. And I essentially live under military occupation, because since Israeli law has not been applied to the areas, our towns are controlled by Israel. We pay taxes. Oh boy, do we pay taxes. And my kids serve in the army. We get education and health care funded by the government. We are Israeli citizens. I hold an Israeli passport. But when I go out on the road, I'm in the Wild West. And that's really where a lot of the terrorism is happening. Leo D., whose wife and 2 daughters were killed, are my neighbors. And they are just but one example of what is happening, and the thousands of people. And you're not even hearing what's not happening, meaning you're hearing something like that, but every single day there are attacks. Every single day, rocks and shooting and trying to drive us out. So I believe that we need to apply Israeli law on these areas. I'm not talking about annexation of the land.
Big difference.
Very, very big distinction that I want to be clear on. Changing the status of the land is a very big issue, and I understand that no one's ready for that. In terms of the world's reaction, I'm less concerned, because the world never reacts well to anything that Israel does to defend ourselves unless it's in their interest as well. So I'm less concerned about the world's reaction. I really just don't want to see another museum to dead Jews. We have enough. Okay, so there's a limit on how much I'm willing to placate the world, who need to get involved in other things and stop being so obsessed with Israel and what's going on internally. But on a day-to-day level, if you get into a car accident, for example, on the road in Judea and Samaria, an army jeep will show up. I think it should be a policeman, like in a civilian society. In the Palestinian Authority villages, they burn their garbage, they throw sewage into the valleys. All of those environmental issues affect everybody living there. And so, because the law is a mishmash of Israeli military law, Ottoman law, Jordanian occupation law, and British mandate law. It is one big mess. And so we need to have a Western law, Israeli law, at least for those issues which are not ideological and not political. It's a quality of life every day for all the people living there. But I also think that certain things that are happening that are illegal need to be stopped. The European Union has, to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars, given money to the Palestinian Authority to build in areas that are controlled by Israel by the Oslo Accords that the European Union signed on. So they are actually overturning sneakily something that they signed on in order to undermine the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria. That's the European Union. I don't think the American government is that bad, but maybe we're heading in that direction. Enough issues to unpack here?
Brief story. This couple over here, my wife and I, and another couple, were in Israel in November with Jazz Aspen. It was a wonderful trip. During that, I invited this couple, another couple, and my wife and I to tour Judea and Samaria. We say Judea and Samaria, you may think of it as the West Bank. But let me remind you that all of the West in the United States is the West Bank of the Mississippi River, okay? So Judea and Samaria. And Eve took us through Judea and Samaria, and one of the places she stopped, she said, we went to Shiloh, which was the first place of the tabernacle before Jerusalem, before the temple was built. That was amazing, but what was incredible, we were all getting very hungry, and she said, I'm going to take you to the best hummus place on planet Earth. We go to a gas station. You know, I got these fancy Aspen people there. I go, what do you mean a gas station? And behind the gas station is this little place, which is the best hummus in the world. It was the best hummus in the world. It was made fresh, it was warm, my mouth waters just thinking about it. Why am I telling you this ridiculous story? Because 2 months later, 2 terrorists walked in and killed 4 people in that restaurant. So let me tell you how that brings it home to understand. Now, what's going on is a change in demographics in Israel, and also the increase in terrorism, especially in Judea and Samaria, are making more people think about protecting themselves. And hence the election of a right-wing government, if you would, because people are concerned not only about what's going on there, but also obviously about Iran and Lebanon and Gaza, etc. So that's part of this demographic change, plus the fact that so many Olim, so many immigrants came from Russia. They've already been through the socialist stuff. And that's part of the reason they've come to Israel and the successes in Israel. So you mentioned the contrast between Ashkenazi and Sephardic. The original governments of the state of Israel are heavily Ashkenazi. Now this is shifting to more mizrachi Sephardi, which are the Jews who come from countries in the Middle East and countries in North Africa. So you've got that difference. You've got the difference between the religious and the secular, and the difference between left and right, hence the mishmash. There are people here who are concerned about how Reform Jews are treated in Israel, especially at the Western Wall. There are people here who are concerned that if this government has its way, this Likud government under Netanyahu, you won't be able to go to a movie theater with your wife and sit next to her in the movie theater because it'll be segregated. Could you give us the real truth on this, please?
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm not saying that there aren't some Israelis who would love to see a religious state. I'm sure there are, but the majority don't, including many religious people. That's not the kind of state that we want to have. We want to have a state where people can choose for themselves, again, as long as other people don't get hurt. Now, that's a very difficult line to walk. So, for example, you mentioned the Kotel. So the Western Wall. So the Western Wall is under the purview of the religious ministry. So it's essentially run like an Orthodox synagogue with a mechitza in the middle. In an attempt, which I thought was a very nice attempt to solve that, Natan Sharansky organized an area that's not at the actual Kotel, it's south of that, but it's also facing the Western Wall, because different parts of the Western Wall have been uncovered in archaeological digs over the past few decades, which is mixed. It's a beautiful platform, and it's where you can do whatever you want. And I thought that was, actually a reasonable attempt. So there's an area for the Orthodox who don't want to pray together. And I had this discussion with an Orthodox man once about the mechitza, and he said to me, listen, the women aren't the problem. The problem is the men. That when we're praying with women, we can't concentrate on our prayers, because you guys, men think about different things than praying, and when there's women around, we tend to be distracted. He was flat out honest with me. We tend to be a little bit distracted from our prayers. So not having women pray with us is an attempt for us to not get distracted from what we're supposed to be doing. So it's kind of turned into this anti-woman thing, but he said, actually, the weak link here is the men, which I thought was a fascinating thing, because it was something that I thought that I couldn't say, but he said it, so I was like, okay, we'll go with that. So again, this is the situation now. The Western Wall, when I went for my master's degree in Land of Israel Studies and Archaeology a couple of years ago, one of my professors had just written a book about the Western Wall. Because essentially the Western Wall is split into half. Half of it is a synagogue and half of it is an archaeological site, the Davidson Center, where I take people all the time. All right, so it's not like one stone over is less holy than the stone to the left. It is in itself an attempt to understand that these are ancient sites that are important to people, also for tourist reasons, if you will, or academic reasons, but they also have a spiritual component. And so it's really only a very small part of the Western Wall that is used for prayer services. Now, I spoke to women of the Wall years ago when they were trying to to change the status of the Western Wall themselves. And one of them said to me, and I was really disappointed because, I mean, I was hoping to come to some clarity with them. And she said, look, we're just doing this as a provocation. And I said, really? Like, there isn't enough anger and stuff going on? Why? And I happen to be somebody that feels that we should have the right to pray on the Temple Mount. I said to her, listen, I'll fight for I even wrote a blog about this. I'll fight for your right to bring a Torah scroll onto the woman's side of the Western Wall of the Kotel Plaza if you'll help make sure that Jews can go up on the Temple Mount and pray, because it's controlled by the Waqf, by the Islamic Trust. And she said, oh, no, absolutely not. So if compromise is only coming from one side, it's not compromise. And this is a problem that we're having with the reforms also. That, it's what they're saying now is nothing. It's nothing. No change in the reforms whatsoever. While the people who are pro-reform are saying, okay, we'll dial it back from a lot of the levels that we think it has to take just to the minimal level, like the unreasonableness clause, which I know personally the problem that we have in Judea and Samaria, in addition to it not being under Israeli law, is who is controlling it. Who's controlling it is the civil administration, which was set up by the Israeli government after 1967, really to protect the rights of the Arabs. And they very much don't want the Jews there. And they will do anything they can. It's much more difficult to get a permit to build in Judea and Samaria for the Jews than it is for the Arabs. They just build wherever they want. And so somebody brought a petition. There was a 20-year-old olive grove of someone that I know, and someone brought a petition, someone from a left-wing organization brought a petition to have it taken down. They didn't have papers that it was owned by anybody else. There was no issue of eminent domain, like a road had to go through it, and so you have to take it away. The Supreme Court voted to take it down. They destroyed 20 years of this man's work. And now it's just an empty field. It didn't help anybody. It's not next to an Arab village where they could farm it. The Jews can't farm it. Whom did this help? And this is what hurts me so deeply, is that the so-called liberal left, who tout themselves as the ones who are really looking for peace, are the ones who in very many situations are the one who to foment hatred and anger from one side to the other. And that's not everybody. I'm generalizing. It's the extreme. But it's enough that they make a lot of noise. It's enough because they control an outsized part of the media. And so their voice is heard way out of proportion to their numbers. And that I think is something that to some degree is happening here in the United States as well. So these are a lot of the different issues that we have, that are going on that you're hearing bits and pieces about, and hopefully if I'm not putting clarity in, at least I'm explaining to you why it's good that you're so confused. You're right to be so confused.
What this comes down to, if I may suggest, is power. When the demographics are changing and people on the left feel like they are losing the control of the media and the government, they get worried. That's why they're trying to keep the court the way it is, because if you have a right-wing government, the court can help snip the feathers and keep things where they want to. If you can't get the votes, that's the way it couldn't work for them. Where have I heard that before? Of course, in this country as well. When it comes to some of these things like gender, like wokeism, like all this stuff, which most of the public doesn't mind what you do privately, but to teach second graders about this when they don't even know what the word gender means, most of the country doesn't want that. But it's the courts that help keep it there. Comment, please.
I agree with you, but you mentioned demographics. So I think that's an important point. Israel is the only Western country to be replacing ourselves. The average Israeli woman has 3.5 children, meaning some have 3 and some have 4. We don't have half children walking around the country. And this is a very interesting statistic. The only Western country that is above replacement, which is 2.1. Europe is finished, okay? The average German woman, less than 1. not as upset about that as I maybe should be, okay? And other European countries as well. I don't know how many, I'm sure many of you traveled to Europe. In 100 years, the Europe as we know it today will not be there. Okay, more mosques than churches already in places like Brussels. I mean, I read the reports, Gatestone Institute and other places that are reporting what's happening in places like Sweden. It is, and we know what's happening in France only because it's making the headlines. So now that number is an interesting number because it's coming from women who would not define themselves as religious. Okay, the numbers of babies coming from the Arab sector from women, and I want to discuss that in a minute also, is dropping as they become more educated. They want to go to school, and they're having smaller families, as are the ultra-Orthodox.
And birth control.
Well, yeah, that's been around for a while, but you have to use it for it to work, and even then. Anyway, so, and also the ultra-Orthodox women who are going out to work. And that's a different issue that I do want to touch on as well. It's coming from Israel is a happy country. I don't know if you saw the poll of a month ago. We are the 4th happiest country in the world after I think Finland, Switzerland, and maybe New Zealand, where like nothing happens but the wool on the sheep grows more than they anticipated. Okay, it's really, and I looked at that poll and I said, what is going on? Like what? We're happy because we have family is at the core of the country, the importance of family, the importance of rituals, and take it out of the religious realm. On Fridays, you will see soldiers going home because they're going home for Shabbat. How they play on that Shabbat is everybody's business, is their own business. But that is the holidays. On Yom Kippur, you got bicycles on the, running down the big highways. There is a real sense of togetherness with all the fighting. Yeah, it's a family. It's a hugely dysfunctional family. But there is still a sense of that we're doing something that's not happening anywhere else in the world. And therefore, you bring children into the world. You don't bring children into a world that you think is doomed. So when you see a birth rate, you understand that in the Western countries where birth control is available, and I'm not putting that down, and there's certain countries where it's not available, and people are having 10 children, it doesn't mean because they're happy, all right? And most of, let's say, the Southern Hemisphere, unfortunately. So but Israel really feels like a country where everything's possible. You don't have to go to college to be able to start an incredible company. You just have to be smart and have an idea. There's really a sense, and I've talked to business people, I guide business people who come, who aren't Jewish, who have no connection with Israel. There's something in the air here. You don't tell an Israeli no, because if you tell an Israeli it can't be done, it will get done. Because don't tell me it can't get done, I'll find a way around it. And that's what's happened in an unbelievable sense. I almost can't imagine the world without an Israel and with what we have provided to the world on so many different levels. So there's that, and that's the demographics. However, there is a lot of tension when it comes to the ultra-Orthodox, and I'm not ultra-Orthodox. I do not live in that world, and there's reasons for it. It's not where my comfort zone is. I feel that there needs to be tradition and there needs to be learning of Torah, but there also needs to be an involvement in civil society, and you have to work and you have to contribute and all of that. But they have a very high birth rate, and that's what's worrying certain people, because their curriculum does not include what you would call STEM here, the core, math, etc., which would allow people to get ahead. Now, talking to people in the ultra-Orthodox community, they're not happy about that. Many of them are tired of being poor, and they want to get ahead. But it's also difficult to go against your community and against your rabbi, because it provides you so much, and it really does. So they've got internal tensions that you're not hearing about. When you're familiar with that world, then you're familiar with some of what's going on within their world and the changes that are making. And some of the women who are out there are just awesome. Really, they're having the babies, they're working full time. One of my sons-in-law works, the most of his team, he works at Intel, is ultra-Orthodox women. And he said to me, they are so honest. They will not make a personal phone call on the time that they're in the office. They're just really exceptional workers. So when you live in Israel, you're working with Arabs, you're working with the ultra-Orthodox, you start seeing a different side to the stereotypes that are just out there. However, there is an economic problem, which is that because the men in the main aren't working, because there's a law in Israel that you can't really go out to work unless you've done the army. And they don't want to go into the army. Now, there's a law that now will hopefully be passed that will lower that age so they can get out into the workforce. Now, a lot of people say, oh, so you're letting them off the hook with the army. The army is not for everybody. We absolutely have to have an army, but it's not for everybody. I have a daughter who's suffering terribly from PTSD from her army service. It's a tough place. But I do think that everybody should do national service, if not the army. Everybody, meaning also the ultra-Orthodox and also the Arabs. There should be no free rides in the country. Everyone needs to do at least a year or two to give back to the country. And again, if we had leadership that was a little more focused, it's like parenting. So one of your kids needs tennis lessons and one needs violin lessons, and don't mix it up. You have to go with the strengths of who you're dealing with. Now, when you go into a hospital, hopefully it's just to, be there when someone's giving birth to twins. But if you're sitting in waiting for someone to come out of surgery at 2 a.m, the person who's coming by to give you a sandwich is wearing a very bad wig and stockings with seams in them. She's not wearing a halter top. Okay, the chesed, the giving of yourself element of Israeli society is stacked with ultra-Orthodox. From Hatzalah to Magen David Adom to Zaka to Shalva and all these different organizations for kids with special needs, way out of their proportion in society, you are finding the ultra-Orthodox. They're already giving to Israeli society in tremendous ways that don't necessarily have a monetary value, because that's such a part of that ethos, is that you have to give. So that should be recognized. That should be recognized, and then maybe some of the people who are mad at them for not going to the army will understand that societies need different contributions in different ways, and this can be one of them. And then they can get into the workforce, and we can stop trying to smash round pegs into square holes for decades upon decades. But I also think that the Arabs need to do that. Okay, they're 20% of the society. They do not have the responsibilities that Israeli Jews have. And a lot of times what you're hearing is they feel like second-class citizens and they don't feel like a part of Israeli society. And I've had many conversations with them. Some of them aren't telling the truth to the news because you look like a traitor to Arab society if you're actually going to say life in Israel is a heck of a lot better than it is anywhere else in the Middle East. Okay, and so very many of them are intimidated. You have to understand that. Okay, but if you're gay, you are gay in Tel Aviv, not in Damascus or Baghdad. Let's make that really, really clear. And they know that as well. But one of my sons had to go to medical school. After 4 years serving the army and a commander, he had to go to medical school in Italy because there wasn't a place for him in Israeli medical schools. Because 20% of the medical school slots are given to Arabs. They come right out of high school and they can go into medical school. So someone who gave some pretty choice years, not to mention risking his life, to Israel, had to leave the country, and he's now not coming back because he married a girl who's not so interested in Israel, and he's gone. He's gone from Israel. So that is a very painful thing for me, and that is something that hopefully will be overturned. So you can't come up and say there needs to be equality and then leave that piece out of it as well, which is something that the left is doing. They're coming out against the ultra-Orthodox for not serving in the army. They're not saying anything about the Arabs. So, again, I'm not saying that the Arabs should be drafted because there are very serious questions about their loyalty. And one of the issues that we have, in addition to the violence that we have in Judea and Samaria, we also have tremendous internal violence in the Arab-Israeli population. I think it's over 150 Israeli Arabs, meaning they're just as Israeli as I am, the Israeli passport, voting, everything, have killed other Israeli Arabs in the last 6 months. Okay, whether it's honor killings, they kill their sister because they think she slept with her boyfriend and that's, maligning the entire family honor, or a drug deal or some tribal thing. And the Israeli police are supposed to go in there and stop that. So you have internal Arab-Israeli violence where Druze and Jewish policemen are going to have to risk their lives to go in there and stop that. So, and then you could say, and what are the Israeli Arabs giving in terms of like the national basket? So this is another issue, and there's also a concern because that there are way too many weapons in their society, and there's a concern that when we have a war, not if, but when, our reserves will not be able to get where they need to go because they have to go from home to their base. And on the way, they will pass Israeli Arab villages who could block the roads and could stop them from getting there. So this is a very big problem that should be and is of much concern. And unfortunately, their members of Knesset just make things worse. Instead of encouraging them to integrate into Israel, to still be Muslims or Christians or whatever else there is. Nobody's asking them to change anything, but understand and speak about how they value their Israeliness and how special it is in the Middle East that is no other democracy, no other open society. They're members of Knesset, unfortunately, take an extreme position, and I think do them no favors. Because there are many members of the Israeli parliament that are Arabs who I don't think are representing their constituency in a way that makes their lives better. And I think that's unfortunate. It's also not my business. You know, I've got to worry about the people that I elected. Actually, the woman that I voted for didn't make it into the Knesset, Ayelet Shaked, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for her, and I hope she gets back in one day. And I think she was doing some really good things. I mentioned to Alan, maybe he should bring her out here one day. She's also lovely and very smart. And I think you would enjoy hearing from her.
You're listening to a mother of children talk to you about what's going on internally in Israel, the stresses involved, especially within her own family. This is why I brought Eve here. Now, what I would like to do, anything that you want to say before we open the questions?
There's so many stories that I can tell of experiences that I've had in Israel, but one in particular comes to mind. Many years ago, I was in a debate situation in front of a Jewish group. It's only Jews and Christians that are even willing to invite me to come and speak. No Muslim groups, will ever do that. Maybe they would, but they're afraid to do that, which is in itself very sad. And there was a Palestinian Arab and a left-wing Jew and myself speaking in front of the group. And when everybody had left, including the left-wing Jewish person, I think from Peace Now or something, the Palestinian Arab said to me, he said, "Listen, I want you to know that I hate all Jews." Okay, well, I guess we're not going for coffee. And then he said to me, "No, I want you to hear this, it's super important." He said, "I hate you, but I respect you." I said, "Okay." This is many years ago when I was first dipping my toe into this toxic mix of what I do. And he said, "I respect you because you're a proud Jew." So the Peace Now guy that just left here, I despise him because he's not loyal to his own tribe, which is me. And if you can't trust him, then I certainly can't trust him. I was blown away. That was like one of my first glimpses into what the mentality was in the Middle East that I hadn't understood up until that point. He taught me a tremendous lesson that day. There's other lessons that I've learned, just one short, I don't know if I told this last year. I moved down to Gush Katif in the summer of 2005. I was hoping that it wasn't going to happen. I had many friends among the farmers. I also do believe that wouldn't have happened if there were mainly Ashkenazim there. Most of the farmers there were Middle Eastern Jews who had really pulled themselves up from the development towns of Kfar Maimon and Ofakim and places that they had been put into in the 1950s and really done well. And I don't believe that it would have happened had it been different, which breaks my heart to even say that. But I was down there the day before.
Gush Katif
was the Jewish area, the Jewish enclave in Gaza. And I was talking to one of the Arabs in one of the hothouses of my friend, and I said to him, "You must be so happy tomorrow, or whatever, 2 days, this all goes to you." And he said to me, "Habracha higiyem haYehudim v'habracha yazov im haYehudim." I know there's Israelis here who understand what I just said. I'll translate though. The blessings here came with the Jews and it'll leave with the Jews. To which I answered something so obnoxious. I said to him, "How do you know that? You're a Muslim." And he said to me, "What does it matter that I'm a Muslim and that you're a Jew? Some of us see God in the world. And I see that this land and this area blossomed when the Jews got here. That there's a special connection of the land of Israel and the Jewish people and God." And he said, "It's all going to go." I said, "What do you mean it's all going to go?" He said, "When my people take over, this is all going to be decimated." He said, "The Jewish owner of the farm that I work for, he pays me before he takes his own profit. If I'm sick, he sends me soup. He comes to my kids' weddings. I go to his. I can hold my head up. I earn an honest salary, and I can support my family, and I admire what he does." He said, "My people are going to take over, and only the powerful are going to have anything here, and I'm going to be left with nothing." And I said, oh, here I am now playing the other side. I said, oh, it won't be that bad. I'm devastated, of course, this is happening. And now I'm seeing that he's devastated that it's happening, which I hadn't really thought of before. And I said, no, it won't be that bad. I'm sure it won't be that bad. It was that and worse. And years later, I tried to find him to apologize for what I had said. And he was dead because Hamas, anybody that had worked with the Jews, was killed as a collaborator. What we would consider moderates, and are we all talking about coexistence? They killed them. He taught me a tremendous lesson that day as well. And I think it behooves all of us, even though it's not the way we think, to understand that this is how the Middle East runs. And that we have to be very, very, very careful. And the internal stuff that's happening in Israel, it weakens us in general as a country, which is, that is a no, that can't happen. That just cannot happen. They are watching all the time. And if you go back into history, and I live in history, the Islam came up in the 7th century in a 20-year blitz of taking over the Parthian and the Byzantine empires, who had been fighting each other for decades and weakened each other. And Islam came and took over almost the entire Middle East and a good part of the Mediterranean basin in 20 years. We have to keep that in mind. This is like that board game of Risk, where you have allies until you don't anymore. And we have to be very, very, very careful and constantly holding out our hands for peace, but also understanding that there are certain places that we can't go because it weakens us. And it means that we have to make very difficult, very, very, very difficult decisions. My son, one of my sons, one more story, served in Hebron. And he came home one morning very upset. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, we spent the whole night in the Arab section of Hebron looking for a bomb because we were told that there was going to be a massive terror incident and the bomb was hidden in one of the houses in Hebron. Hebron is a real hotbed of Hamas. So he said, we walk into an apartment at 2 a.m. and the kids start screaming and the grandmother's screaming. And he said, Ima, they hate me. He said, and I understand why they hate me. He said, I walk in a uniform into their house at 2 a.m. Of course they're going to hate me. And then we start looking through their drawers because the bomb isn't going to be on the dining room table. Okay? So we're looking through their drawers and invading their privacy. And he said, it made me so sad. He said, I'm an uncle and these cute little children hate me. And I had 2 reactions. One was intense pride in him that he was able to see that, even in uniform, or maybe especially in uniform, that he was able to see the distress of the other side and have that humanity. But he had a job to do as an Israeli soldier, and they did find the bomb that night, by the way, and saved many lives. And the other reaction I had was total fury at the people who put him in that position, at the terrorists who used their own people, at the decisions that some Israeli governments have made that it ended up empowering terrorists and giving them guns. 40,000 guns in Oslo were given to the Palestinian Authority, and the misbegotten belief that there were good terrorists and bad terrorists, and the good terrorists were going to protect Israel from the bad terrorists. Do me a favor. And so this is not simple. To raise kids who still see all sides of it and are out of their comfort zones all the time and literally risking their lives. When there is a war, I have a son-in-law who goes to Jenin and 2 sons who go to Lebanon. So this is not theoretical for me at all, okay? I want to do anything to stop that. Anything to stop that. I don't want anybody dying, and I don't want a mother in Damascus crying over her children either. It's enough. But the decisions that we make that sometimes look to the world like we're being too strong, the world is very uncomfortable with strong Jews. We are uncomfortable with our power. We are. We're used to kind of laying low. That pogrom will be over soon, and let's just get through. Okay, so this whole thing is new. I mean, this whole thing is new, but I'm imploring you, if you're sitting in this room, then I believe that in one way or the other, you care about the future of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. And I'm imploring you that whatever it is that you do, to not weaken us, whatever your political opinions are, to be very, very careful, to understand that when people get out there, and again, I'm not a fan of the prime minister, and compare him to Putin, okay? He's not Putin. He's not my favorite person on the planet, but he's not Putin. Okay, but people are listening to that and changing their opinions about Israel because of comments like that. All right, we live in a world of tremendous information, or maybe I should say more honestly, disinformation. all right? And everything that we do really has ramifications. And you guys, you need to punch above your weight. You really do. You can't just sit on the sidelines here. There's too much at stake for all of us. So thank you, Alan, and thank all of
you. Before you leave, we have your emails, and if anyone would like to get emails from Eve and get further, deeper information that we just don't have time to go through here, she would be happy to send it to you. And how do you want them to do this? We have the emails. We're just going to send out to them and see if people respond.
In a couple days' time, I can just send you websites or different links of places you can subscribe to so that you can get, some more of the real news, some more understanding of the reforms, some of the experts at it and their analyses. And again, thank you all so much.
First of all, yeah, Alan, I can't thank you enough for doing this every year and Eve coming here. Thank you so much. So, Eve, just tell me what year is it that you are going to run for the Knesset, and which party?
God willing.
I'm not going into politics. First of all, then I can't speak for myself, which I did tonight. I didn't speak in the name of any organization. I spoke as little Jewish mommy coming in and trying to give you unfiltered, very unfiltered, view of an average Israeli citizen, which doesn't mean anything because every other Israeli would have a different take than I did, to some degree or not. I don't want to go into politics. I tried a little bit. I was on the local council of my town for 10 years, which was a very interesting learning experience. It's just not for me. It's just not for me. I want everybody to do their own thing and succeed at what they do. And politics is a pyramid. And in order to get to the top, you're going to step on other people, and you're going to have to be, really callous. It's not in me to do that. But I try and find politicians who do represent the way that I feel and try and support them. But it's a tough arena. You guys know what arena means, by the way? I'm going into tour guide mode for a second. Arena means sand in Greek. So what does that have to do with sports? The Romans would put sand on the floors of where they played their cruel games to soak up the blood of the people that got killed in the gladiator games and everything they played. So now arenas become synonymous with sports, but it comes from a very cruel thing. So at least we're beyond that with the Romans, but it's not the place for me. I'm 62 years old, so it's like I'm still buying green bananas, but I do understand that I have limited time to accomplish what it is that I want to accomplish. And this is what I want to do. I just want to come and talk to people and to teach. I have a ridiculous amount of knowledge in my brain about history and about all these current events. I love taking people around the land with the Bible, without the Bible, trying to get them to understand. Catholics, Jews, Christians, it doesn't matter. Politicians, and just try and take them to places like I did with Alan and Judy that they never went to before, and really understand what we're up against. Because unfortunately, most organizations like Birthright and others do not go into Judea and Samaria, and they claim that it's for insurance reasons or security reasons. You can get an armored bus and go. That's not a reason. They don't want people seeing what's really happening there. They don't want people seeing the mansions, no other word for it, that the Palestinian Authority live in mansions while Jews are living in shacks. Okay, because there are 4 very bad things that you can be in America today: white, rich, male, and Jewish. And if you can smack those 4 things on Israel, then you hate Israel, because Israel's a privileged country, and obviously the Arabs are the people who are suffering from it. All right? So you're either the oppressed or the oppressor in today's world. And Jews have now become part of the oppressors. But when you go into Judea and Samaria, you see that that's a lie. And so there are a lot of reasons why people don't want you going in there, because then you start questioning some of the stuff that you're hearing. And it's just much easier to, just go with the flow and not have intellectual curiosity and really try and understand what's happening here. But from my point of view, if you don't understand the problem, you are not getting anywhere near a solution. And that's a major issue. Then you just think it's territorial, and it's far from just being that.
What you do is far more important than being a politician. Question.
I feel incredibly fortunate that we've had the opportunity to hear you for several years. Your stuff is great. I would like to suggest something, though, from what I heard and what I already said, a slightly different nuance than on this one issue vis-a-vis the judiciary, et cetera, reasonableness, et cetera. It's, I think, a little disingenuous to suggest this is a direct vote of the people when you have a 50% number. One of the things that Alan Dershowitz did point out, or suggested the other night, was if they want to do something like this, you don't make it a nice edge 50 plus 1. You make it 60% or 3/4, those kind of things.
Agreed.
Another thing, if I may, the suggestion that having justices appointed by insiders and justices is non-democratic, and you gave Alan gave the example of you could have liberals or conservatives, and you don't want that just perpetuated, which I 100% agree with. But by the same token, in our country, in our state, Colorado, the way justices are picked is by a committee containing several justices, some Republican, some Democrat, and overall, and they send a bunch of names to the governor, and of those names, the governor, of those names, they pick 3, and then the governor, of the 3 they've selected, the governor picks 1. Why did they come up with that system? They came up with that system because history has shown in this country that when you have political selection of justices, you get political answers versus getting highly respected professionals like the Israeli Supreme Court. Internationally, it's one of the highest respected courts in the world. And to demonize them all and say it's just going to be a hack thing and put in their own people. One of the other points that Dershowitz made the other night was in the 75 years of the court, there have only been 23 cases overturned. And the last thing I'll say, because it's late, this whole concept of reasonableness, we're all hung up on words, and there's no constitution in Israel. We all know that. But when you also think about what our laws are based on in this country and the British common law and things evolving over time, there is no issue that comes up that you cannot find 2 cases that one says the law is this and the other says the law is that. But what the common law always did, and I would call it a portion of reasonableness, is you look at the facts. This is the way I learned in law school, although a lot of people have different ideas. Now that's the way the world is. The idea is you look at the facts, and then you look at the different precedents, and you say which precedent will come to the most just, best conclusion in this fact pattern. So to say reasonableness, it's arbitrary, I would suggest it's not. Now I'll shut up, but I love you. You're great, and the stuff you say is wonderful, even though I don't 100% agree.
That's fine.
Thank
I
you.
could be married to you. My husband.
Yes.
A few weeks ago at the Aspen Ideas Festival, I attended a session where Martin Indyk spoke along with a Palestinian professor from the University of Maryland. And one of the things they talked about was the concept of, is Israel an apartheid state? Could you please comment on that and explain that? Because I found that very, very disturbing.
Look, we all hate apartheid. So it's one of those easy ways of hating Israel. Israel's an apartheid state. I hate Israel. Okay, Israel's not an apartheid state. The definitions of apartheid, I'm not saying that there aren't certain Israelis who don't like Arabs and certain Israelis who don't like ultra-Orthodox and certain Israelis who don't like anybody, okay? But mandated by law that there are different people who get different rights, and I'm not talking about Judea and Samaria here, I'm talking about Israel proper, and Judea and Samaria is a problem that that I'm saying we have to find a way to solve. Israel is not an apartheid state. People will say to me, oh, there's apartheid roads in Judea and Samaria. And then I take them into Judea and Samaria, and I point out the white license plates, which are licensed by the Palestinian Authority, which happen to usually be on really expensive, beautiful cars, and the yellow license plates, which is licensed by the Israeli Transport Ministry. And everybody's driving together. So where is the apartheid here? Where there's apartheid is village. I can't go into Arab villages. Why? Because the Israeli government's afraid I'll get killed, which in itself is ridiculous. I can't get lost, or I'll get killed and someone will blame me. You shouldn't have gone into an Arab village. How about the fact that why is it okay to think that it's all right to attack some woman who got lost and then blame her for doing that? I mean, why they can't be held to standards of normal human being? Like, in a way, I think that's racist. To say, like, don't go in there because the Arabs will kill you. Oh, so you're saying that that's how they are? I think maybe that's not how they should be, and it should be different. But Israel's not an apartheid state, and that is used a lot in order to get people to short track hatred of Israel. And I'm sorry, but it's a little more complicated than that. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm probably one of the oldest person here. I'm 81 years old.
Probably not, but go ahead.
Probably at 1968, one of the few who went through Israel right after the 68 war.
Wow.
And went through Gaza and went through all the places and now
Amazing.
the West Bank and could. I want you to understand, I love Israel. And the people, my friends, are the same way. My partner led the Jewish group. They went to meet with Herzog. He was the leader for Miracles to say, trying to get something done. I think it was this speech, and I apologize. So he's given his life to it. To get the Iranian Jews out of Iran, I was asked to go negotiate with the Secretary of State, and I succeeded.
Amazing.
But I have, my cousins were Holocaust survivors, live in Israel. They served. So I think I understand your views, but I have to understand that. I think you have to understand the views of the people. I'm a lawyer, and I'm
100%.
that Israel's got to reach a moderate, and I haven't seen that happen.
So when my kids served in the army, they were mandated to protect, possibly die for the other soldier next to them, with whom they disagreed on everything. Because that's what that is. And that's why I think that the politicization of the army in this particular situation was devastating. Because you go in there, and it doesn't matter if you're religious, not religious, left, right, or center. You mentioned people who gave their lives for the country on the right and on the left. When we go to the soldiers' funerals, nobody's asking who we voted for. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So, we're all in this together, and everyone, of course, is entitled to their own views and very passionate, views. So I think that that's been a big problem here, that this was allowed to be politicized. Keep it on the civilian and hopefully civil discourse, but it never should have gotten beyond that. And that was a very, very big problem. And maybe the biggest problem that came out of all of these, the anti and pro-reform things. The army needs to stay out of all of this, because it's what we have protecting us against enemies who really don't care if we eat kosher or not. They really don't. The Nazis didn't care, and the enemies that we have today don't either. And we have to keep that in mind. Sometimes we take a dining room table discussion and we make it global, and people don't understand what we're talking about, and they interpret it in different ways, and that's what's so dangerous. But thank you for everything that you've done. May you have many more years to do things.
Hi.
Hi, Ken.
So, like you...
Close.
Oh. It's very important that as Americans, I started going in 71. I'll be on my 40th trip in November. My husband just got an Aliyah in Harow a few months ago. We were in Shiloh. My grandparents are buried there. My nephew fought in Gaza. And his commander said, if you don't shoot first, even if that little boy is in the Arab arms, you will be dead. And that is what goes on. But I think a lot of Jews are not, we're only involved because maybe somebody reads the foreword or they read the Jewish press. You have to be responsive. You have to know what you are talking about. We are living a very comfortable life here. It is very difficult in Eretz Israel. You have to go to Efrat, even if you're uncomfortable. We must get out of our comfort zone. That's why I go all the time. My heart is sick, but my heart is... I have a friend in Israel. He's one of the greatest men I've met. He's only 39 years old. His name is Yoel Zilberman. He does HaShomer Chadash.
HaShomer Chadash.
He's one of the greatest Jewish men you'll meet in Eretz Israel. And he says, if we do not know the Torah, the land, and the people, we cannot speak for our people. And like you You're beautiful. I will see you in Efrat.
You got it. Thank you.
Eve, thank you so very, very much. And thank you all